Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bob Ives, and I'm with the Granite Family History Center in Sandy, Utah. And tonight, it's our pleasure to have Robin Fuhlenbach with us. And she lives in Salmon, Idaho. So if you want to send her fan mail, that's where you want to send it to Robin. A little background on Robin. We go back quite a ways, but Robin served for, I guess, 2.5 years as a full-time missionary in the training zone downtown in the Utah Salt Lake City headquarters mission. And her job there was to teach new missionaries how to do family history. And we did several presentation training sessions there for the Family History Guide over the years. And when COVID hit, she joined the training zone where she was teaching Zoom classes to everyone in the mission. And then after she was released, she returned to Salmon, and she was called back as a senior service missionary to the same mission. But this time she got to serve from home. And during the course of her tenure, she has provided discovery experiences for new missionaries and did all that through the church missionary department. And her professional life included 25 years, bless your heart, teaching junior high school and high school. And then she was spent 6 years as a writer-editor for the Forest Service. So Robin has a great resume there, and it's always been a pleasure for us going way back to work with her. And she has actually a class or two here posted on our website. Speaking of which, you can see this class posted on the website. It usually takes a few days. And I will put the website up in the chat room, but it's www.granitefhc.com. And you can go on the website and click under resources. And you can see the classes that we have archived there, and you can watch those 24/7, 365. And nobody will knock on your door for a fee. And then you could also click there on that same website under class schedule and see what the upcoming classes are going to be for the rest of this class session season. And we have some really great ones lined up for you, and teachers from all over the country are lined up. So you can check that at any time. Again, we'll use the chat for any questions that you may have for Robin, and she will check those at the conclusion of her presentation. So, Robin, thank you for being with us again tonight. I take it also that you are a grandma.
I am.
Thank you. Okay, Robin, take it away.
Okay. I'm really glad to be with you tonight. And the title of this presentation is Grandma Stories, but you don't have to be a grandma in order to do this. It's just ways that you can share your family histories using technology. So I'm a grandma, and I started this project because I wanted to teach my grandchildren about their ancestors. And I was inspired in my efforts by Mary Ellen Farron, who happens to be my daughter-in-law's mother. She is a fantastic artist, and she wrote and illustrated a book describing the life of Alma Ash, one of her ancestors. And she did it specifically for her grandchildren. Notice it says a story for children here. And her artwork is really beautiful. And I knew I couldn't begin to do the artwork that she created. So I turned to technology to tell my stories. And for those of you who are artists and who want to print your own family stories, we'll talk about that information later on. And we'll even go back and look at this book a little bit more, but it is really a beautiful work of art. So what are our objectives today? We are going to, first of all, choose stories that acquaint families with their ancestors. That's the whole goal. We want to choose those stories. The second one, objective, is to identify where we can get these stories. How do we find them? Where do we put them? Number 3 is how do we fill out the stories and put them in context? So maybe you have a little bit of a story, but you don't have, you've heard that it was in such and such a place, but you don't know where that was. And so we're going to talk about ways we can fill out the stories that way and put them in context. In context, that doesn't mean fabricating the story. And then our objective 4 is to choose how to present them. So first of all, let's talk about choosing stories that acquaint their families with their ancestors. Take into account the age and the attention span of your audience. So if you're talking to young children, your story is going to be a little bit different than if you're talking to teenagers, or if you're talking to a family home evening group. Remember that the average attention span for adults dropped from 12 seconds in the year 2000 to 8 seconds by 2013. So are you all asleep? Because I've overdone the 8 seconds rule. Okay. Second, choose your stories that are uplifting and tell of qualities you would like your audience to emulate or at least admire. Now, there are some times when we want to stretch this a little bit when we have something that's quite entertaining. However, we don't want to dwell all the time on our lemons, nuts, and bad apples. It'd be nice if we could find things that we could admire and our children and grandchildren our audience, let's put it that way, would be interested in and still think, wow, I'm related to that person. Whoops. Avoid fabricating. Stick as closely as you can to the facts as you know them. You may not know them all, but you can find out as much as possible before you try to tell it to them, and don't make things up. You'll get caught at it every time, I promise. And add humor where appropriate. Now, I love this cartoon. It was in Family Search, on the Family Search blog. We're going to talk about great-great-grandpa Sherman. This is the best picture we could find on his reward poster. And I like the looks of the family as they're watching. Yeah, right. Okay. Include illustrations and interactive questions to keep your family involved. Now, if you've published a book and you're just sharing that book with your family, you can't really do this. But if you're doing it as a PowerPoint or as a newsletter, there are places where you can put interactive questions in, and always illustrations are great. The illustrations in Mary Ellen's book are just beautiful. Okay, add a little humor. I want you to meet my grandfather. This is Ormus Earl Brower, and my grandmother, Sarah Robinson. We called them Pop and Mom. Our parents were Daddy and Mommy. Pop loved a good joke, almost as much as he loved his grandkids. And I love this picture of him. It's just tender and sweet. It was okay if the joke was on him. In fact, he laughed even harder that way. What was amazing is that Mom loved his jokes too. And she was very shy. You can see from this picture, she's just a sweet, tender lady. And she hardly ever smiled, let alone laughed. So when she would tell the story, she'd laugh so hard that she'd cry. And the story was of Pop sneezing out his false teeth during state conference. In fact, it was, if you can imagine this, you know how we set up chairs in the gym, that's where it was. And so when he sneezed and his teeth went out, they had a rubber thing on him and they bounced down the aisle, and he had to go on his hands and knees to retrieve his teeth. Mom laughed so hard telling the story that she cried. And so this was a different humor-loving story of her, and it humanized her to me. And so I wanted my kids to know that. So I tell a story every chance I get. They probably have heard it so many times they don't think it's funny anymore, but I still laugh. So in 2015, the Family Search blog ask for patrons to send in their funny family stories. And this is what Steve Anderson wrote. So this might give you some ideas of some things that you could put in a family story to add the humor. He says, does your family have a funny story you still laugh about today? I'll bet if you started asking around, it wouldn't be long before someone began sharing with you a great story of when some uncle, cousin, or great grandma did something really funny, weird, or yes, embarrassing. In fact, you may even find out that there's a story about something you did when you were young that maybe you had forgotten about. I don't want to go there. There are too many of those. Don't limit your search for just your immediate family. Think back to your grandparents and great-grandparents. Some stories are so great and so funny that they get passed on from generation to generation. So that's what he was talking about for asking for patrons to send in their stories. But we can always ask family members for funny stories or embarrassing moments, and they can provide great material for grandma stories. And they add a dimension of humor to the stories that could maybe be kind of serious if you didn't have that little dab of something funny in there. Okay, so here are some simple interactive questions that I use to help draw interest of my children, my grandchildren. So here's besides that, it helps to see how to read what a family group looks like on Family Search. So I asked them, how old was Graham when his mother died in 1841? And so they went here and they looked at Graham and they figured out, here's Graham. And it's not easy math there. So you don't want to ask the little kids how to do that, but the older kids can handle that. And then I'd say, how old was his brother Zebedee? And there's Zebedee, and it's a little bit easier subtraction for him. And then I asked the question, how many of these children were alive then or when their mother died? And then they could go through and see, well, there's one that died before, and there's one, and there's one. So that got them interested in looking at the family tree. And that turned out to be an interesting discussion I had with my children when we did that one. Okay, objective 2, identify where photos and stories can be found. Now, in Family Search, this is always the go-to start, it seems like. You can choose your fan chart to see which ancestors have photos and stories. And this is you know how to do this, I think. You open up Family Tree, you go to your tree, and then you choose the fan chart if that isn't your default. Make sure that you choose the 7 generations, which is what this one is. In this case, I chose photos for the one I wanted to look at. And then over here is the key. So the clear ones or the white ones there's nothing there as far as photos are concerned. And then this gives the number of photos according to the shade of color as you go. So this looks pretty good for my mother's side of the family. My dad's side isn't quite so well filled out, but that's just photos. So this is what the stories one looks like. Okay, I still got the 7 generations. I've changed this to stories, and this tells me how many stories I have. Now we're going to go back to Pop Brower. Okay, notice his is white. There are no stories in his Family Search profile at all. There's nothing in there. And I knew that wasn't right because I knew my mother had written his biography with him. So I went to his person page, and then I looked at his memories, and I discovered that the 30-page biography of my grandfather didn't show up in stories because it was saved as a document. So that's a little quirk with that Family Tree fan chart, because it won't show you if there is a story in your documents. It only shows if there's a story in your stories. Does that make sense? So here's his story, and I think it's quite fun. And notice it's 30 pages long. Some of it's his exact words in his own journal. Some of it has been edited. Okay, Also in Family Search, you can do a timeline that you can access from the person page of your ancestor. So here's Pop Brower again. And in this is this person page. And instead of details, you just click on timeline. And then the timeline comes up and it has the ages, the dates down here and what happened. There's a little logo in there that tells you there's a baby there. There's a lily showing this is the death of his mother. That's where he lived. And then over here, there's a map that shows you all the different places that he lived. And he used to say his father lived by the adage, a rolling stone gathers no moss, because they were always moving. So that's in Family Search. So can you do that from other places? Yes. Ancestry has a similar feature, and it's called Life Story. So you go to your tree in Family Search, in Ancestry, excuse me, and you click on your ancestor, and then you choose their profile. So you just click on profile. And then from there, you choose Life Story. And this, instead of being as a timeline, it's a written narrative. It tells you the same things, but it's written out. And it's a little bit more maybe user-friendly, at least reader-friendly. And I think it's quite interesting. So this only has in it what is in your Ancestry account. So if you don't have very much information in your Ancestry account, it's not going to put it into a Life Story for you. And that's pretty indicative of this next place, which is MyHeritage, because I haven't taken James Tanner's advice that he gave us last class to get a profile or a tree up on MyHeritage. So I just had to go to my dad, because he's the only one who's in there, and take a look at what could be done. So if you have somebody that is a family member and you know these things about them, you can add those things to their profile. You can talk about their education information, how to contact them if they're still alive, or me, or the person who's entering it, what work they did, and any personal info that you think is important, favorite things. You can add a biography, a web, and then here, this is something that you can't really do for the other sites, is you can add links and videos and other content. I haven't tried it. I'd be interested to hear from anybody who has. Maybe you could share with us during the chat if you have tried that. But I think that is also a very good way to show family stories. Okay, and we all, I think, are familiar with old family albums, maybe diaries or journals that your family has kept in the family for many years. Or you might find some journals online, published online. And you can always try searching Google for your ancestor's name. I have to tell you the results that I had. So I was looking for Lorenz Fullenbaugh. I knew he had a journal, and I knew that it had been donated to a university. So I didn't know which one for sure. So I went to the University of Utah, I went to BYU, and I went to Utah State. And I came up with the University of Utah Library Special Collections. And so they sent me to this Archives West place. You can see where I am. And then asked for the search criteria. So I put in Lorenz Fullenbaugh. This is my husband's great-grandfather. And it tells me that the Lorenz Fullenbaugh papers are at the University of Utah Library Special Collections. And there's 37 occurrences of terms in the document. I'm not sure exactly what that means, if that's his name or what it is, but it's his personal records. It has family records, naturalization papers, missionary notes and journals and correspondence. So it's quite a, I know that his journal is really fantastic reading. So that was interesting. And then I thought, okay, well, I got that there. Let me try the church history library. So I went to the catalog churchofjesuschrist.org/search, and I typed in Lorenz Fullenbaugh, and I got a whole bunch of stuff. And there are 9 different documents of records that he has. And so that's really interesting. So what if your family is not LDS? Well, does that mean you can't find any journals or anything online about them? That's not true. I think you can find lots of things. The Family History Guide, of course, has great suggestions for gathering and recording your photos and stories. And what I did is I went to, this is the Family History Guide main page, and I went to youth and came up with this photos and stories. And this is a place where you can get ideas to connect with your ancestors and things that would be geared more towards the youth. But you also can go to Family Search and any of these other 4, and there are memories, places, or photos and stories sections. So those are some good sources as well. Of course, the Family History Guide always has good stuff. Okay, so I am going to, I wanted to show you this one more. Sorry, this is another published history that doesn't have to do with an LDS person, a member of the LDS Church, member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Many counties in the United States compiled and published histories, and they often contain residents' names and brief biographies of those people. This particular history contained information about my ancestors who lived in Wayne County, Pennsylvania in 1813. And I found it just doing a Google search. So, and it was quite informative. Another history that was published tells the story of the Wisconsin pineries in 1841 to 45, and includes stories about my great-great-grandmother, Lucy Maria Miller. And I found it on the BYU library site. So that's also a good place to look for different stories about ancestors. Okay, now I'm going to show you some examples. This happens to be the first few slides of my PowerPoint presentation explaining to my children about Lucy Maria Miller. Now I want you to take a quick look at these pictures. This photograph at the bottom is the original. This is the one that was on Family Search. Somebody had put it on Family Search. I took this to the MyHeritage photo enhancement tool, and this is what I got back from it. Her left eye looks a little weird, but look how beautifully that turned out. I was so impressed. So I'll tell you how to do that here in just a second. So I introduced Lucy Maria Miller with her photo and the years of her life. I said that she was the daughter of Henry William Miller and Elmira Pond, and I didn't do the photo enhancement on them. And then this is the original picture, and this shows her as the wife of Oliver Lee Robinson. Okay, this is how you access the MyHeritage photo enhancement tool. If you've never done it before, it really is cool. So if you go into, my screen sharing is paused, it says. Is it still showing?
Yeah, it's still showing just fine. Although, yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
There you
now
go.
I'm good. Okay. To access MyHeritage photo enhancement tool, you log into your account in MyHeritage, and this is a free account. Remember, you can do it as a member of the LDS Church, or if not, you can, you pay for it, but you can get into it. And then you click on photos. So this is the main menu across the top of the MyHeritage page. And you click on photos, and then you choose from the drop-down menu, enhance your photos. and it asks you to upload a photo or drag and drop. So these are the options right here. Upload your photo or drag and drop. If you have your scanned photo saved onto your desktop, then you can just drag it in, or you can click on it, copy and paste, and put it into the uploaded photo. Then you can start, it'll just start, and it asks you whether you want to just enhance it, or if you want to colorize it, or if you want to do both. So I use my snipping tool a lot to get the photo from another online source. And then I save that photo to my desktop, and then I can just upload it onto here. So that's in a nutshell what you do. And that it's a very sophisticated tool. It does a really, really nice job, and it's all automatic. So if you wanted to make some changes to it afterwards, you'd have to Photoshop it or something like that. But I thought that was a really cool tool, and I use it a lot. I thought I did a wonderful job with Lucy. Okay, the next slide I put in there is a family tree, and it shows that she is my great-great-grandmother. And so when I put this up there, I asked my grandchildren, how many greats are they? So they had to figure that out. Okay, mom and dad would be great-great-grandchildren, so we'd be great-great-great-great-grandchildren. Okay, so I included that, put in an interactive question, and to tune them in. Then these are from some that published history that I found in the BYU library. This is the Wisconsin Pineries. And this tells the story in Elmira Pond Miller's words about their first winter in the Wisconsin Pineries with their 5 children. And they didn't have enough to eat. They had to eat potatoes. And one daughter had never eaten a potato in her life. And when she came to the table, she'd look so sorrowful, but she'd never uttered a word of complaint. And I think that might have been Lucy. She would have been the right age at that time. Okay, I used maps and photos from that published source. And these were some pictures that were added to that thing, to that history in the BYU side. And I used this map to show them where they started out with these logs, rafts, and they traveled all the way down the Mississippi to Nauvoo, which is right there. And that was when Lucy was 7 years old. So my grandchildren are river rats. We used to float the river, but they always had to have their life jackets on. And so they understood that this might have been a little scarier without life jackets and to be so young. And I think when I presented this, my youngest granddaughter was 8 years old at the time. So that made it relevant to them. Okay, objective 3. This is where we learn how to fill out the stories and put them in context. And this is where you can use maps and searches and photos and newspapers. Let me show you an example of what you can do when you don't have any photos of the people that you're talking about. So this is a story about Edward Fitzgerald and Jane Dunn, who were Irish. And this is their home in Athy, Ireland. And this is the Crom Abu Bridge. Crom Abu is the Fitzgerald family logo, or I don't know what it's on their coat of arms, but I'm not sure exactly what it's called. And so this is the bridge right here that I have shown in this picture. Fitzgerald is the name, and that's where they lived, was in the Athy. And then this is a little description that I just got from Wikipedia about the town itself. And this is the castle. And it was built, the first one was built in the time of the Anglo-Norman settlement in the 12th century. So that's the 1100s. And it was a stronghold on the estates of the Fitzgerald Earls of Kildare. Now, I don't have any connection to those Earls of Kildare that I know of. We're probably some relation somewhere down the line, but there's no royalty that we know of in our blood. But that's interesting that we can show that, and that family came from this place where the Earls of Kildare lived. I included photos of where my family came from in Ireland. So this is Duke Street in modern Athy. And then there's the old church where Jane, Edward, and their son John were all christened. There is the estate where they lived when John was born in Levittstown. And this is the house, the manor house that the main residence of the wealthy landowner that Edward probably worked for. And then the mill, this mill was in operation at that time. And it looks like that might have been where it was. Then talked about them, said going across the ocean, what their experience might have been, still don't know for sure, and then where they settled in New York. And these are some examples of what they might have been dealing with in New York. I knew the address was 118 Mulberry Street. And so I put this up there with how many blocks away from the church. So there's the church. So the kids had to count how many blocks, and then how many blocks away from 5 Points. And they figured it was just a half a block. And then we talked about 5 Points being that place where they had a murder a night for 15 years. So they lived really in a rough part of New York. And we talked about what it would be like if they lived in that part of town now. They live in New York, by the way. And then we talked about the tenements, how bad it was. And here's the tenement museum. And there's a picture of the same house that they lived in today. It's in the middle of Chinatown. Then I found this as an 1861 recruitment poster asking for volunteers to join the Union Army. And this is the regiment that Edward joined. And he went to the rally that they had and he signed up on the 4th of July. So that's where he went. That's what happened with him. And actually he was killed in the Civil War. So it made a big difference to the family. Okay, objective 4. This is where we get to choose how we can present our stories. Okay, so you've seen some examples that I've done of the PowerPoint presentations. What I ended up doing with my grandchildren is I would save the PowerPoint as a PDF file, and then I would send it to them. So they could put it, I emailed it, and then they could put it up on their computer while we FaceTimed. And so we could talk about things and we could visit, and I could see their faces and they could tell me things as we went. And that seemed to work out pretty well. Of course, we can always do a Zoom like we're doing now and share the screen, but it was hard while I was sharing my screen to see their faces. So I kind of like doing it the other way. Of course, you can always do a Word document and do the same thing, PDF it and send it, and then talk about it as you go, or a Publisher document. The one on the left is done in Office Publisher, and Office Publisher is pretty handy for doing newsletters. You can kind of do a little bit fancier stuff with that. The one on the right is a Word document. You can still insert pages of documents and pictures and share all those kinds of things with them. If you don't have, if you're only using your phone, probably the best thing to do is to do it as just a document, one of the documents, either Office Publisher or Word, because trying to put a PowerPoint on a phone and send it by phone, even though you can do it, the pictures come out really small and it's very difficult to read. Of course, it could be that way with the others too. Oh, whoops, sorry. Okay, now we're going to talk about Mary Ellen's book and Lulu, because Lulu is a little bit more professional than just doing it your own little PowerPoint and sending it to your grandkids. This is this page on Alma Ash, the story of Alma Ash, done by Mary Ellen Ferren. What she did is she prepared the whole book with her drawings and her story. And then she sent it in a PDF file to Lulu, and they make it available to the public for a fee, either in an ebook or as a printed book. You can see here where my arrow is. And the printed book is $23.80, and of course you have to order that, and it's a hardcover, so it'll take a while to get it. Sorry. And down here, it's 99 cents for a PDF version. So you can do, if you have something that you're very, you know, it's a professional type document, you put it together, you want to show it just as it is, you can do it this way and publish it. There are some other ways that you can publish as well, and it doesn't have to be quite so professional. There are other online formats. No, these are mostly photo books where you tell the stories with photos and captions. I don't know if any of you have ever tried these before. Shutterfly, Mixbook, Snapfish, and Collage are some of the ones that I've seen and that I have had people use and tell me about. They are always having big sales. So if you get on there and it looks like it's way too expensive, just wait a little while and go back and they'll have a big sale, half price plus 20% off, or, you know, things like that. So this is for people who want to like tell their family story for the year in review, and they download their photos and put little captions to them and then print the book up. And they turn out really well too for a printed version. Okay, so in closing, you might wonder how my grandma stories were received by their audiences. So these are just a few of the comments that I got from my family. Paul said, just last time I saw him, when are we going to do another grandma story? We haven't done one for a long time. That he would remember, because he's 16, I thought was quite remarkable. And then to ask me, just out of the clear blue, to do one again. Josh said, will you do a grandma story about Edward and Jane? So that one I was showing you came from his request. Stephanie said the kids enjoyed making connections between things they had learned in social studies at school and an ancestor. That made it easier to connect. And then James, Alice, and Laura said these things, and I can't remember who said what. He said, that was interesting. I didn't know about that. I'm glad I didn't live back then. We had an ancestor who worked on the Erie Canal. That's just a few miles away. So those are their responses. And I think telling grandma stories is a lot of fun. I hope that you can find some applications for what I have said and taught tonight, my experiences. I think that it's a worthwhile thing. There are lots of studies that show that children or even adults who have an idea of where they came from and who their family members were and what they did in their lives, they're better adjusted, they're able to cope with difficulties better, and their lives are more peaceful, which is really what we're looking for, right? So I'm done, and I will take questions. If you are interested, I can go to Mary Ellen's book and show you a little more of it. If anybody wants me to do that.
We have a couple of minutes, Robin. Why don't you switch over there and do that?
Okay, I will. Let's see, where is it? There. So this is how she put it together. She did her stories and she put the pictures. She did her watercolors, and then she told a story from his journal. So I love her pictures. They're just sweet. Notice the kids barefoot. Notice the mom barefoot with maybe raggedy socks. She's the teacher. It gives you an idea of what their lives were like, what they lived in. And she did a lot of research before she printed this, or she did this artwork. And they were members of the church, and so they were very poor, but they would spend some time together in church, and they enjoyed a good reputation, she said. And they used to play Going to the Valley.
Which format did she do these in, Robin?
Actually, she made it up in a document. I don't know if Lulu has a method for them to do that or not, but I think what she did is she just, I'm not sure, probably Word. And then she would download her pictures. She might have done it in something like Office Publisher, where she could put pictures in and then do that on top of it. But I know she PDF'd them before she sent them out, so they couldn't be changed. I guess I'm not very good at answering your questions, but it could be done in Word. It could be done in Office Publisher. Yeah. I think Office Publisher would probably be the choice that I would make. But I know she scanned in all of her artwork, and then her husband is very techie, so he's the one that probably did that part of it. She did the artwork and he did the techie part.
Gotcha. Well, it's really well done.
It is, isn't it? And
Yeah.
Then when she gets down to the end of it, let me just kind of scroll down here. Talks about the dad and the oldest son sharing a pair of pants. And then he finally made it. Sorry, I'm scrolling through kind of fast, but you can see the artwork is really pretty nice, what it was like. And then they finally got to Salt Lake. So I love this picture because it talked about the arc lights and how the temple was nearing completion when they got there. And that's about what the temple looks like right now. And then he went to work as a shoemaker for ZCMI. And then it talks about he got called to go on a mission, but he died of pneumonia before he was able to go. So that's the end of his story. But I thought that and this is a drawing that she did of his photograph. So it's pretty realistic, I think. And it's got 44 pages. And she did it because she wanted her grandchildren to be able to know about this family member. Okay?
Really well done. Are there any questions for Robin?
I want to know, has anybody used MyHeritage to enhance their photos?
Doesn't look
yes.
like.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and there's a section in the Family History Guide under the MyHeritage project that talks about that and how to do that. And it really is an amazing thing, what they've done with that. Well, thank you, Robin, so much.
You're welcome.
And again, this class has been recorded, and you can view it at www.granitefhc.com. So thank you, Robin. Good night, everyone.
Good night.